But what I think is different now to, and Shamima was right about it, things have gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years, is for that renting population, the ones who are at the margins of being able to afford it, even with that help from accommodation supplements and income-related rent subsidies. They're the ones who are the most exposed when there's a change in policy about who can stay in a state house, about whether you've broken the rules, where you can even get into a state house and having to prove that you've done everything you possibly can to not lose your tenancy. And I'm really pleased to see the new models that are starting to come up in social housing to solve this. I think market failure in not being able to produce small enough, warm, healthy, affordable homes, often higher density, be it apartments, particularly that integrate with public transport, that reduce those transport costs in the big cities. And it's really interesting what Simplicity have been able to do, in part because they are using a new model for investing capital. And I agree that there is more than one solution to this housing problem, but right at the core of it is the skewed incentives that we have for saving in our economy, which mean for a lot of people who own a home, or maybe want their own kids to get onto the so-called housing ladder, they see the prospect of leveraged and tax-free gains on the rise in the value of land as a way to get ahead and an asset to protect. So one of the issues here is that, way back as recently as the early 1990s, even in the early 2000s, there was not this huge lump of, frankly, unearned, untaxed capital gains for a chunk of the voting public to protect. So the last 4 or 5 elections we've had have really been about what do we do about this issue of leveraged and tax-free gains on capital, which created some very wealthy people. And ironically, the fact that we focus so much of our investments on housing has meant that because, still upwards of 2/3 of people, well over 60%, own their own home, our traditional measures of inequality actually look sort of good compared to some other places, simply because some of the middle New Zealand actually are quite wealthy because of it. But that also means they don't want to give it up, and they don't want to give up the prospect of getting on the ladder for their own kids. And one of the really interesting challenges of a not cohesive society, one that's disconnected and does a lot of othering, is that it's very difficult to get one group to make a change that they view as being negative for their own personal finances and for so much to be at stake, because now there are leveraged gains at stake. And one of the beautiful things about Simplicity and the rest of the KiwiSaver landscape is that it creates savings that have a long investment horizon, that are also prepared to invest in the long run in an asset that produces a great service, and even after paying tax, actually washes its face, compared to the other things it compares itself to. And if we can change those incentives so that people do not see housing as an investment so much, and I'm talking about households as well, not just, landlords, and maybe are able to put more money into these vehicles like Simplicity or KiwiSaver vehicles, then we start to change the incentives and we become like a normal economy, frankly. We are an exception, and we just have to look across the Tasman. In Australia, they do tax capital gains. To be fair, not the full 100%. John Howard changed that so that it's less than 100%. And also, there are things like land taxes, stamp duties, which give local government some of the financial wherewithal to help build the infrastructure for housing. And this is where I think that this core debate, one of many, but right at the heart of our political economy, is how do we change the incentives so that we are encouraged to build housing that's a service and not encouraged to bet on housing as an investment.